Welcome, Brookings Honors Bio students, to our last podcast. We've made it through dealing with the cell parts that are found inside of plants and animals and bacterial cells. And this last podcast is going to take a look at some of those cell parts that are just seen in plants. Plants have a cell wall on the outside of their plasma membrane, their cell membrane. They have huge vacuoles inside, and they have chloroplasts to help them do photosynthesis. And remember, one of the other differences between plants and animals is no centrioles. Only animal cells have centrioles. That would be a good test question. What are some cell parts found in plants that are different from animals, or how are plant cells different from animal cells? Let's take a look at cell wall first of all. That's the protection on the outside of the cell. Now they have an extra layer outside their cell membrane, more than we do, and made of carbohydrates and proteins. Cell walls, the plant cell walls, the molecule that makes them sturdy is this molecule that we learned about in our molecule chapter, very first chapter, and that is cellulose. It's a kind of polysaccharide made by joining glucoses together in a particular way that makes them very sturdy. Think of the girders or the steel I-beams that are in a building that anchor and support the building underneath the bricks, and that's a good example of cellulose. Remember we talked about the stringy stuff on celery that makes it. We often call cellulose fiber in our foods. We don't digest. We don't have the enzymes to break down cellulose in plants material, so most of it passes right through us. Use it to kind of clean out our digestive tract. So let's talk about cell walls. Found outside the cell membrane or the plasma membrane, provide support and protection for our plant cell. And we talked about cellulose being the molecule that makes plants sturdy. Bacteria also have cell walls, but they're made of a little different molecule. They're made of something called peptidoglycan. Peptidoglycan, part protein, part sugar molecule. And we're going to add one more thing to our flipbook here. I'm going to ask you to add another little statement, because other kinds of cells have different things in their cell walls. Bacteria have peptidoglycan. Fungal cells, fungus, think athlete's foot fungus, yeast is a kind of fungus. Fungal cells have chitin, C-H-I-T-I-N, chitin in their cell walls. To make them sturdy. They don't have cellulose. That would be another good test question. How are the cell walls of these different organisms different in that they have different molecules to help to make them sturdy and support the cell? Okay, let's take a peek at our slideshow now. Cell picture, and see if we can find our cell wall. So I'm going to ask you to pick a color, and I'm going to choose, I'm getting kind of hard to find one that I haven't used yet, but I think I'm going to go with the gray thing here. And remember this little yellow line that we put on our plant cell is our cell membrane, plasma membrane. Sorry, I'm trying to get colors and talk at the same time. Plasma membrane. And outside now our plasma membrane, this little yellow line, is our cell wall. Notice there are connections here to allow plant cells to talk to their neighbors. We're not going to worry about names on those. They're called plasmodesmata. And this layer now outside of my cell membrane is important in protection and support for our plant, is our cell wall. So I'm going to ask you to color yours in your cell picture, just like we've been coloring all along. This is one of our last cell parts now. We're getting to the end here. And remember, bacterial cells also have a cell wall. So let's label cell wall here. Cell wall. Cellulose in our cell wall is going to make our plant cell sturdy. And I'm going to pick another color that's similar to the one I used my plant cell wall. I'm going to go a little different shade. And I'm going to also add a cell wall on the outside of my cell membrane, my plasma membrane in my bacterial cell, because bacteria also have a cell wall. Little different substances in their cell wall to make them sturdy. They don't have cellulose, but they do have cell walls. Peptidoglycan is the molecule in their cell walls to make them sturdy. So we got that in our label now, our little answer key. Cell walls found in bacteria and plants, not animals though. No cell walls in our animal cell. We're going to switch programs and go back to our slideshow. And we talked about cell wall. And our next cell part is the vacuole. And vacuoles are pretty large in plants. That's that big part that we've been seeing when we color our plant cell, that big, huge storage space in the center, surrounded by a membrane that holds our whatever it is that we're storing. Basically, vacuoles in plants are storage spaces, and they can store just about anything. We use them to store water, especially, but they can store salt, they can store proteins, enzymes, carbs, garbage, just about anything can be stored in a vacuole. And so think storage containers, anything the cell wants to save. Vacuoles are smaller in animal cells, and no vacuole, remember there's a membrane surrounding that storage compartment, so no vacuoles in bacterial cells. One example of a vacuole, kind of vacuole, that is used by single-celled organisms that live in fresh water. Think pond critters now, like an amoeba or a euglena or a paramecium. They're tiny single-celled pond critters. And if you live in fresh water, you always have water molecules entering your body. We're going to talk more about that in our next chapter. I'm going to do transport, about why that is. But basically, it's a little storage compartment now. Contractile vacuoles have the ability to squeeze and force what's inside of their storage space there out of the cell. And these contractile vacuoles are very important in controlling water in cells for organisms that live in fresh water. And as the water enters the cell, it's going to be picked up and stored in one of those contractile vacuoles. And then the vacuole can actually squeeze to force the water back out of the cell. It's important in maintaining homeostasis. Remember that vocab word from our first chapter? Maintaining the balance of water and ions in our cell. And so they're a kind of vacuole, storage space for water. Okay, let's get something in our flip book. Vacuoles are storage spaces. Can really store anything. Can be proteins, carbs, other kinds of molecules. Can store water can store waste in our storage vacuole. They're really huge in plant cells. It takes up majority of our cell in our plant cell is that storage space. And plants have basically one big giant vacuole. Animals have more vacuoles, but they're smaller in size, many small vacuoles. And remember, not in a bacterial cell. They don't have the membrane surrounding that storage space. No membrane-bound organelles. Okay, let's see if we can color now our plant vacuole. So let's find our cell parts picture. We're going back to coloring. And we're going to pick a cell part. I'm going to pick my highlighter again because I can go faster. And let's pick a color that we haven't used lately. I'm going to try this green color because that kind of makes me think of plant. And this is our storage space now. Inside of our plant cell, there's a membrane around it. And important for, this one's been kind of sliced so you can kind of see inside to see that you could put something in that space there. And so I'm going to color my vacuole in here. Big thing that plant vacuole stores water. If you've ever seen a plant wilt or fall over when it hasn't been watered recently, what happens is the plant is actually losing water out of its storage space. And if there's no water in there to kind of give pressure inside the cell, the plants will tip over, they'll wilt and look kind of sickly. And it's because they're losing water out of that storage space. So let's put vacuoles here. Vacuoles are in both plants and animals, so they're kind of on the middle list here, but a lot smaller in an animal cell. So I'm going to switch back to pen so I can do a little more careful coloring here. But our vacuole now, remember when we did lysosomes, and looks like my lysosome color has disappeared. This little storage sac that contains whatever the lysosomes are digesting are vacuoles. It could be a food vacuole, it could be any kind of a storage vacuole. If it has something in it that the plant or the animal, the animal cell it wants to break down, we can put it into a little vacuole or storage space, and then we can dump the lysosomes on it. So animal cells also have vacuoles. I'm going to add my lysosome color because remember, once I have something in that vacuole or storage compartment, I can dump my lysosomal enzymes on top. And we kind of colored those before. I'm going to fill them in again because I seem to have lost my color along the way. Lysosomes. And remember, we can have some loose in our cell here. I'm going to fill in lysosomes. So my little storage spaces now that have the lysosomes attached to them are vacuoles. Okay, let's go back to our slideshow here. And we have one last cell part to talk about, which is pretty important for, pretty important for our plant cell and its ability to make food. Remember, we talked about plants as autotrophs, and they have the ability to make their own food. And the cell part that's going to help them do that is our next cell part, and that's the chloroplast. Chloroplasts take energy from sunlight. They have a way to capture that sunlight energy and use it to power the machinery inside the chloroplast to make their own food, make glucose. And we talked about that in our last chapter. This is another cell part that's surrounded by a double membrane. So there's membrane on the outside. There's these membrane stacks inside the chloroplast called thylakoids. The little coins stacked up look like pennies in a stack are the thylakoid membrane sacs, and they contain the enzymes for doing photosynthesis. This is another cell part, in addition to the nucleus, that has its own DNA. This cell part is pretty important, and we want the information about how to do our job right there in the cell part. And we're going to talk more in our next slideshow about why it is that only certain cell parts have double membranes in their own DNA, mitochondria being the other one, and what connection those two organelles have to each other. So let's get something about chloroplasts in our flipbook. They're the double membrane organelle. In addition to the mitochondria, the only other cell organelle that has its own DNA and double membranes. So that might be a good test question. Where might I find some DNA in the cell outside of the nucleus, outside nuclear DNA? And that would be in the mitochondria and in the chloroplast. Those membrane sacs inside the chloroplast are called thylakoids. Thylakoids, that's a vocab word. And those thylakoids are going to contain the molecule called chlorophyll. That's what makes plants green. And contain those enzymes. Now, chlorophyll is the molecule that's going to be capturing the sunlight and then providing that the energy. We're going to use that chlorophyll molecule to do photosynthesis, to make our own food if we're a plant cell. And remember, chloroplasts are only found in plants now. So there are some other kinds of organisms that can do photosynthesis, have chlorophyll in them. Think algae and some other kinds of little pond critters. But plants are really the only, the cell that we're talking about here, either bacteria or animals or plants that have those chloroplast organelles. So let's take a peek at our cell picture now. I'm going to make this be tiny here. And we're going to go back to our cell picture. Pick a color to be your chloroplast color. Green might be, some shade of green might be a good idea. So I'm going to use green. And I'm gonna outline this, because if I fill it in, then I can't see what's inside, and that's kind of important in helping to ID what it looks like. So I'm gonna just kind of outline in green here. And remember, we were comparing against mitochondria before to see what the cell part looks like inside of our little oval here. This is a chloroplast here. So I'm going to kind of go around the outside. And we got one over here. One over here. They're kind of oval shaped like a mitochondria, but inside very different. Remember, mitochondria have those cristae membranes, and the chloroplasts have these little thylakoids. They look like coins, little pennies stacked up inside. So we're going to use our chloroplast color to fill in our label, chloroplast. And remember now, chloroplasts are only seen in plant cells, so we don't have them in animals or in our bacterial cells. That, my friends, is the very last cell part. We made it through. You should have your flip book filled in, all the pages. If you don't, talk to me about what you're missing. Go back and look at some of the podcast videos about the cell parts and make sure that you get all your parts filled in your picture and your flip book pages all filled in. Thanks for hanging in there and watching and learning about the cell parts.